Imagine being trapped in a cave for 7 consecutive days while a torrential downpour floods the valley outside. You have no books, no internet, and the fire is your only connection to the outside world. For the vast majority of human history, rain was not just an inconvenience, it was a life altering environmental reset. It dictated migration patterns, food storage strategies, and the very foundations of our social structures. When the sky opened up and the weather turned hostile for days on end, our ancestors didn't just sit around waiting for the sun, they innovated. The common misconception is that early humans were constantly on the move, chasing herds across the savannah. In reality, hunter-gatherer societies were profoundly place-based. They knew their territories with an intimacy that modern humans have completely lost. If you lived in a rock shelter in the Dordogne region of France 20,000 years ago, you knew exactly which limestone overhangs stayed dry during a north wind. You knew which caves flooded and which remained bone dry throughout the wet season. When the rain settled in for a week-long siege, the first priority was always fire. Fire was not merely a source of heat, it was the hearth around which human consciousness evolved. To keep a fire burning for 7 days while damp air seeped into the cavern required constant, tedious management. This was the era of the fire tender. It was a role of supreme importance. One person was responsible for drying out gathered wood, stacking it strategically to ensure fuel was always primed and ready to burn. If the fire died, the social fabric of the group died with it. The fire was the stove, the light, and the security system that kept predators at bay. With the fire secured, the environment became a factory. Rainy weeks were the most productive times of the year for technological refinement. Think of it as a forced industrial retreat. Archeological evidence from sites like Pinsevent in the Paris Basin suggests that humans used these indoor periods to focus on complex, fine motor tasks that were impossible while traveling. They sat in the dim amber light of the hearth and performed the delicate work of knapping stone. A flint blade is not just a tool, it is a masterpiece of geometric precision. Creating a Clovis point or a Solutrean laurel leaf requires hours of uninterrupted focus. You cannot rush the percussion flaking of a core. You cannot hurry the pressure flaking of the final edge. Rainy weeks were when the toolkit was replenished. They repaired spears, rehafted arrowheads with resin and sinew, and meticulously scraped hides to create the leather needed for the coming winter. This period of indoor confinement was also the birthplace of storytelling. Without the pressure of the hunt, the social group tightened its bonds. Anthropologists believe that the complex mythology we see manifested in cave paintings, like the stunning animal figures at Lascaux or Altamira, was refined during these long, dark stretches of rain. The elders used these days to transmit the group's history. They taught the younger generation about the constellations, the habits of the mammoths, and the taboos of the tribe. This wasn't just idle chatter, it was a massive data transfer. They were encoding survival information into stories, using the rain as a natural barrier to ensure their knowledge was passed down intact. Music likely echoed through these caves during the rain, too. We have discovered bone flutes dating back to the Aurignacian period, over 35,000 years ago. These aren't crude toys, they are sophisticated instruments capable of producing distinct musical scales. Imagine the sound of a hollowed-out vulture bone flute vibrating against the limestone walls of a cavern while the rain pounded against the entrance. It was a form of sensory grounding, a way to maintain morale when the world outside had turned into a muddy, impassable obstacle. But there was a darker side to the rainy week, too. Confinement brought challenges of health and hygiene. In a crowded cave, the buildup of wood smoke could irritate the lungs, and the lack of sanitation meant that illness could spread rapidly. This is why we see evidence of seasonal migration. Humans did not stay in the same cave for months on end. They understood the limit of their environment. By the time the rain ceased, they were often ready to move, not just because they needed new game, but because the shelter had served its purpose. When the skies finally cleared and the ground began to dry, the human response was immediate. They didn't linger. They packed their gear, which had been perfectly serviced during the downtime, and stepped out into a refreshed landscape. The rain had cleared the tracks, washed away the old scents, and often triggered a growth spurt in edible plants. They entered a world that was literally renewed, stepping back into the rhythm of the hunt with tools that were sharper and stronger than those they had brought into the storm. We look back at these rainy weeks as a primitive existence, but it was actually a period of intense mental and cultural activity. They weren't just surviving, they were building the foundations of human culture. Every time you find yourself frustrated by a rainy weekend or annoyed that you're stuck indoors, remember the hands that worked by firelight thousands of years ago. They didn't view their confinement as a waste of time. They viewed it as an opportunity to sharpen their blades, polish their stories, and strengthen the bonds that made them human. Perhaps the greatest lesson from our ancestors is that the environment doesn't always have to control us. We have the capacity to turn moments of isolation into periods of invention. When the world forces us to stop, we don't have to stand still. We can refine our tools, deepen our knowledge, and prepare for the moment the clouds finally break. The next time the rain begins to fall, consider that you are participating in one of the oldest human traditions, the decision to use the storm to build something stronger than the weather itself. In the end, we are the descendants of those who realize that when the door to the outside world closes, the door to the inner world of human potential swings wide open.